Hi, I'm Ajit Lenin. I'm starting a video series to share my learnings on enterprise architecture over the years and also share my thoughts on how to establish effective enterprise architecture practices in organizations. And this video series is intended towards anybody who's already an established enterprise architect or someone who wants to start a fresh enterprise architecture practices in their organization, or anybody in a developer community who is interested in enterprise architecture field. So as I explained, I'll be sharing simple videos of 10 to 15 minutes duration. We'll start with basic understanding of enterprise architecture and in the first couple of videos, and then get into components of enterprise architecture, get into the details of it. Then finally, we'll move into architecture styles and patterns. Right? So we'll look at some of the common styles and patterns. And the intent is to learn as I share the information. I am expecting you to provide me feedback so that we can all learn together. So let me introduce myself. I am a senior enterprise architect at Verizon Communications. I'm driving digital transformation initiatives at Verizon. I have overall 27 years of experience and 23 years in the communications industry, pretty much mostly in Verizon. 10 plus years as an enterprise architect. And I'm a big proponent of TOGAF. So I'll be using some of the terminologies or methodologies from TOGAF, but the intent is not to explain TOGAF. The intent is to explain my learnings and my thoughts, right? So there will be some overlaps, but these are thoughts I want to share with you based on my learnings, right? So to start with, there are a few myths to be broken, right? So these are general thoughts on enterprise architecture, which I believe is wrong, right? So this needs to be corrected to have an effective enterprise architecture practice, right? First, a lot of people think that enterprise architecture is a collection of diagrams. Actually, it is a representation of the enterprise itself. It's not just diagrams. This is a true representation of the enterprise. Enterprise architecture artifacts are reference documents. So a lot of organizations use enterprise architecture artifacts as just reference documents for people to learn, right? But to be effective, this should not be a offline reference architecture documents. These are live repositories. These should be live repository of entities and behaviors that organization deal with, right? And finally, the enterprise architecture artifacts are, a lot of organizations create the artifacts just for a project. So when a transformation project starts, they create the artifacts, and the artifacts are forgotten once the project is done, right? But in true sense, to be effective, the projects are derived from the enterprise architecture itself. So enterprise architecture should be our base through which the transformation initiatives should happen. Right? So this just a few things. I just want to, they generally followed myths. I want to say that we need to break it. And we'll start with, I'll basically introduce a new 6-layer conceptual framework. I believe in my thoughts, these are the 6 layers each organization needs to take care of to have implement a good enterprise architecture practice, right? So these are just conceptual framework. This is not replacing, or this is not an alternate to TOGAF, which is basically the architecture development frameworks. These are conceptual framework to establish the practice itself, right? So conceptually, I'm splitting the whole enterprise architecture framework into 6 layers. Right? So the bottommost layer is our repository itself, where all the artifacts goes, all the physical storage. Right? So, and the second layer of it is the artifacts itself. So this gives us a opportunity to decide what artifacts we want to create. Right? That is on the artifacts layer, and then the architecture domains. This I'm following the TOGAF domains. So we have business, information, application, and technology domains, right? So we can decide on what domains, what artifacts goes against each domains on this layer, and breadth and depth, right? So this is basically how broad we want to cover the organization and how much depth we want to go, right? So that needs to be defined. The evolution aspect is more of the time aspect. So nothing is permanent. So all artifacts or the enterprise architecture or the enterprise itself keeps evolving, right? So the evolution aspects comes on that layer. And finally, the usage. So who is going to use this artifacts or the enterprise architecture itself, and how they're going to use it is the usage aspect of it. So in order to start a effective enterprise architecture practice, we need to make a decision on each of these layers, how we want to design each of these layers so that we can have an effective enterprise architecture practice that fits the organization's needs, right? So now we'll just step into a little bit of defining the enterprise itself, right? So what is an enterprise? So I'm taking the definition from TOGAF itself. TOGAF basically defines enterprise as any collection of organizations that have common goals. So it can be a single business unit or a whole entire company, or it could be a group of units together, all working towards a common goal. So, and to basically define an enterprise, I'm looking at, in my view, there are three key features of an enterprise, right? One is the scope of or the boundary of the enterprise itself, and then the common set of goals that binds these enterprises together, and set of KPIs that help us track those goals, right? The enterprise, when we say enterprise, it is basically a collection of all the physical components in the enterprise. It could be infrastructure, human resources, any physical components, or any informational components. These are like software, applications, policies, the data that's part of the organization, everything, right? And also, when we talk about enterprise architecture, the enterprise includes any external entities, to be customers, suppliers, partners, who is interfacing with enterprise, right? So that also should be captured as part of enterprise architecture, right? So let me move into some basic scoping examples, right? So the scoping of an enterprise is dependent on the enterprise itself. Based on the operating model of the enterprise, we can have basically define the scope of the enterprise, how broad we want to capture the enterprise, right? And how we want to organize within the enterprise itself. So there are so few examples here, right? So there are different ways we can scope. So on the first example, this is an example where each portfolio within the business is managed as separate enterprises, right? So we have a retail store chain, we have sales as an enterprise, supply chain as an enterprise, and the workforce management as an enterprise, right? So these are three independent enterprises, and the customer and the supplier aspects also get captured. In the second example, this is an example of where the entire company is covered under the single enterprise, right? So in a single enterprise architecture domain, the entire company is covered, right? So whether it is their sales or facilities management or finance, the entire hotel chain company is represented in a single enterprise. And the third example is to show that the way we scope enterprise architecture can be flexible. So here there are two portfolios, BSS and OSS, related portfolios that can be combined together into a single enterprise, whereas a network portfolio can be managed as a separate enterprise, right? And the last example is to show the aspect of shared service, right? So there are companies where these are separate organizations who have shared assets that's shared across the companies, right? So in these examples for a bank, right? So there is a banking portfolio, there's a loan portfolio, and there's a credit card portfolio. And the financial services as a horizontal shared services across all this. So we'll have an enterprise which represents the shared services, and each of these individual enterprises can reuse, right? These are the shared services enterprise. So this is just to show different ways an enterprise can be organized, right? On an enterprise architecture perspective, right? So this is not the entirety of it. This just to show some of the few ways we can organize, right? So the way we want to organize an enterprise entirely depends on the enterprise, how the enterprise wants to operate in its domain, right? So with that, we'll just summarize it before concluding this video. So enterprise is any collection of organizations that have common goals, and enterprise architecture is a live representation of an enterprise, not a set of reference diagrams, right? And the 6-layer enterprise architecture framework that I'm introducing. We will get into the details of the 6 layers in the subsequent videos. So I'm planning to use the 6 layers as a reference to go through the aspects of enterprise architecture and see how we can truly establish a effective enterprise architecture framework, right? And the scope of enterprise depends on the enterprise operating model itself, and an enterprise can consist of other enterprises. And when we in an enterprise architecture perspective, the enterprise includes external entities like partners, suppliers, customers who interface with the enterprise. Right? So with that, I'm concluding this video. In the next video, we'll look at basically looking at defining the enterprise architecture itself, looking at the 6 layers, right, at a very brief level, and then we can get into each in detail into each layers. Right? So please share your feedback on this video on LinkedIn. Thank you. Thanks very much.